And we are grateful to you all for coming this morning to the Hearst Media Center. If you haven't been here, this is, as our publisher George Hearst likes to put it, it's an opportunity for us to literally as well as figuratively be a center of community conversation. This facility, of course, used to be filled with people who were working on hot lead, putting out the newspaper and the old technology. And so you might say that this facility is one good development as a result of the revolution that has taken place in the communication industry. Speaking of revolutions, when I first came to Albany as a reporter, the Senate majority was run by Warren Anderson, the Assembly by Stanley Fink. Every senator, every majority senator but one was a white male. There was a woman from Westchester, but she was soon pushed out by that ambitious young assemblyman, George Pataki. And so the revolution has come. For this event, by the way, to discuss the opportunity to discuss that, we are grateful, let me say, to our sponsor, Granville. By the way, when Tom Brokaw, senior correspondent of NBC News, hosted the Today Show many years ago, he read commercials. Granville and Malta, we are very grateful to because the sponsor of this event makes this possible. Granville and Malta is a 511-unit apartment complex by Rochester-based Lessess Development and Morgan Management. The Malta complex features more than 500 one, two, and three-bedroom apartments and townhomes for rent, conveniently located in the heart of Saratoga County. So thank you to Granville. How about that? So I'm happy to turn this over to my colleague, Casey Seiler. Casey came to the Times-Union as entertainment editor, became, after a few years, the state editor in charge of our state capitol bureau and political coverage. And he then moved to the newsroom as senior editor for news, and a few weeks ago became managing editor. So here's Casey Seiler.
Thank you very much, Rex. I appreciate that. We've both been promoted in the last month. My promotion is slightly less historic in terms of diversity, but all the same. We opened these CapCon breakfasts. The first one we held was a discussion between John Flanagan and Carl Hasty about a year and a half ago. That was an excellent discussion, but it gives me great pleasure to welcome Andrea Stewart-Cousins, the senator from the 35th District, newly named Senate Majority Leader. Please welcome. So I want to kind of start fast and talk about what happened, what's been happening in recent weeks, and specifically what happened yesterday in the Senate with the passage of the Child Victims Act. This is a piece of legislation that has been around for a long time. It was bottled up by the Senate Republican Conference for many years, and it passed yesterday unanimously, 63 to nothing. How do you explain that? How do you account for a unanimous passage of an ostensibly controversial measure like that?
Well, first of all, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Good morning. And thank you so much for hosting and allowing us to have a great dialogue. So yesterday was pretty phenomenal because we had no idea. Well, first of all, let me start by saying I have a 39-member majority. So 32 is where you can claim the majority, so I have 39 people. And we were all going to vote for the Child Victims Act, so I really didn't canvass what the other side was doing.
That's not your lookout.
So we got on the floor. I guess the reality is that the advocates, those who had been fighting so hard, and as I said in my floor remarks, we had gone to the press conference to talk about the fact that we were going to be passing this bill finally. There was someone holding a sign saying 16 years waiting. I mean, this has been a long time. And obviously, we're talking about people who were children when they were victimized. And instead of us just having a great time clapping and so on, I mean, people were crying. They could not believe that finally they were going to have justice. And I was curious to see who on the floor would actually vote against making sure that people were able to bring to justice those who victimized them when they were children. And so what you heard, were just people standing up saying, oh, well, we didn't do it because of this, and we should have done that. But ultimately, the advocates won the day. And the fact that this was a measure of justice is what prevailed. And so everyone voted for it. I mean, I'm happy. I'm absolutely delighted because it's been far too long. And, hopefully it sends a very strong message that this is unacceptable in New York. It will not be tolerated. And, people who are, I mean, even a message to children, frankly, that if you are in this situation, I mean, so many kids wouldn't even talk about it for years. And they say the average person really talks about it several decades after it happened. But hopefully the message to everyone is that it's unacceptable, and if something like that does happen, speak up, and there's some protections here in New York.
I was speaking to a group of engineers down at the convention center yesterday. This room is slightly warmer than that room in terms of audience reaction. I can tell you, engineers are not known for their sense of humor, but they were very nice, and they gave me a free lunch. But what I was noting to them is that January, with the exception of the State of the State, the budget presentation, and the arrival and the swearing in of new lawmakers, is usually the dullest month on the legislative calendar. After all those rather ceremonial events happen, there's definitely a lot of discussion, but on the floor, it's usually resolutions honoring championship basketball teams, resolutions memorializing lawmakers who might have passed away between the end of the previous June and session. But this year is very, very different for obvious reasons. You mentioned the fact that you have a 39-member majority. With so much social policy out of the way so early in the legislative session, what are your expectations for the budget negotiation? In other words, what are we going to be reporting on? What are we going to be fighting about all through March? And for the rest of the session, usually it's the end of the session where most of that social policy gets accomplished.
Yeah, well, you said my leadership is unique in state history, and I felt that there were so many things we've been talking about, and probably most of the audience realizes that the Senate Democrats have been wandering in the wilderness for quite some time. It had been a separated caucus. We had a group of people who were pretty much affiliated with the Republicans, and so whatever we wanted to do, we were frankly unable to do because of the bifurcated situation. And everything that we passed, whether it was this Child Victims Act or the DREAM Act, or even our ability to delink the teachers' evaluation from the test score, the conversion therapy, stopping conversion that we finally passed agenda. I mean, there were just so many things that we've been speaking about, that we've been really saying that reproductive health, women's rights. I mean, being able to speak on the campaign trail, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and then you get there and you get 39 people. I mean, what's your excuse, right? So we've got 15 women in our conference. I mean, it's really unprecedented what's going on I know you want to clap, but so what Casey said was true. I mean, not that many years ago. I mean, and with the Republican movement, there were 20 out of 63. So, I mean, this has become a very different dynamic. I have 15 new members who all came in, ready to, most of them had really hard either primaries or general. I mean, and all of the members who are there are people who have been through a lot to be there and to stay there. So this is a group of people that know exactly why they're there and came for the purpose of public service. They have courage, they have integrity, and it is an amazing combination. So everybody came ready to rock and roll. So we had said we were going to do these things, so we figured let's hit the ground running and get these things out of the way. Today we're going to do a bunch of gun safety bills. We're going to ban bump stocks like they did in Florida. We're going to expand the time for the background check. Again, nationally, we can't even get that done. In New York, with the SAFE Act, we were able to do it, but our background check period is only 3 days. And it turns out that 91%, the statistics say, of people who apply for to buy a gun actually get an answer within seconds almost. So it's 9% who there might be some gray areas or questions. And when those questions arise, it takes more than 3 days in order to figure out what the problem is. And according to the FBI, frankly, it's they have about 25 days. So we wanted to expand it so that you would have an appropriate amount of time to actually get a definitive answer, whereas right now, if they don't have an answer in 3 days, they get the gun. And, that kind of, isn't the point. So we are going to be doing that. And another important piece, and we'll move on, that we'll be doing today is what we call extreme risk protection order, or the red flag bill. And that is if somebody who is you feel might be a danger to themselves or to others. And, I had a classic example in my own hometown where someone came up to me and said, my nephew is living in the basement, he's become extremely paranoid, he won't go out, we don't know what he's doing. And they were really concerned that he had, something down there, a weapon or whatever. And there was no mechanism for them to actually call and say, please check him out. He maybe is, doing something that could be dangerous. But this says that if you're feeling that kind of discomfort, that there is an ability to call the authorities to remove the gun, and the person will get, a hearing and be able to prove or disprove whatever the concerns are within, about 10 days or so. But at least it allows you to call attention to something that could be dangerous. I mean, the fact is that it's only the end of January, and already there's been 25 mass shootings in I know, it's shocking.
Yeah.
It's shocking. So, this gun stuff, I know it won't be a 63-0.
Probably not.
No, probably not. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of conversation from people who are, talking about Second Amendment. And again, I want everybody to be assured that Democrats are not against the Second Amendment, but we are against this extreme gun violence and a culture which is really, unfortunately, as it relates to gun violence, really, really shocking. And anything we can do to eliminate some of the dangers and take guns out of the wrong people's hands, we ought to do. And even if, again, I had in my own hometown again, a kid who was killed by somebody, I guess it was a drag racing thing. He was a Major League Baseball prospect. And, his family, working class, his dad was a carpenter down in 9/11, suffering from a lot of the vestiges of the 9/11 tragedy. And this kid was gunned down, and his brother started this campaign, and I'll emphasize pain because this was his way to exercise the pain of his brother's death. And he started the gun buyback program in Yonkers, and it's found it to be very successful. A lot of guns coming in off the streets. So my colleague Shelley Mayer and I are co-sponsoring that bill to make it available, gun buyback programs available throughout the state, because it does get people, get guns out of people's hands. And I think the more guns we get off the street, the better off we are.
The last piece of significant legislation that was passed in January was, of course, the SAFE Act in
Right.
2013.
That's
And of course, that took the Newtown killings
That's
and
right.
the killings in Webster outside of Rochester to actually to move something.
And I'll say that actually, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I had just become leader then.
That's right.
Yeah, so there you go. I know the history, but I was the minority leader at the time, otherwise we would have kept it rolling, but I wasn't able.
And that was actually the first month of the majority coalition
That
between
was-
the IDC and the Republicans. So
Well, actually, they started that back in, well, no, okay.
no, but the
Yeah,
majority
they
coalition
formalized
was
it, they
2013.
formalized it,
Yeah.
that's exactly right, they formalized it in, yes, and that was the first thing, and even with the coalition, it was the majority of my members, all members, I think at that time we had 28, and the majority of those bills in the SAFE Act were our members' bills.
Right.
And so we came full force to the table, and with the help of some of the Republicans and the people in the IDC, that bill was passed. But yes, I'm glad you mentioned that. So yeah, I'm just carrying on with my tradition then. I do a lot of good legislation in January.
So I do want to spend some time kind of talking about your biography, your story. One of the things that happens when you become the leader of a legislative conference is people do profiles of you, even though you've been around for 12
Nobody
years.
cared,
No, you care more now. But Rachel Silverstein of the Times Union did an outstanding piece that ran a couple of weeks ago that turned up all kinds of fascinating details. Jimmy Bielkine, former Times Union, did an outstanding piece in the Wall Street Journal as well.
Yes.
There have been others, but I was struck by something that Rachel pointed out in her piece, that you are one generation removed from the sort of racism that is not, that we think of as being in the distant American past, but your father served in the segregated military.
That's right.
So as you were growing up, what was your sense of how race was impacting your life? Or is that sort of like asking a fish to to get a sense of what water means to them?
Well, probably. The reality is that, I always tell the story because my parents are just incredible people. My dad did serve in the segregated army in World War II, and he, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, two Bronze Stars actually. And when he came out, he was not able to take advantage of the GI Bill. I know a lot of people don't know that. When you talk about the big wealth gaps, a lot of that is because of that. When you come out and you have one set of people who, oh, here's all the homes you can get, here's the loan, don't even need a loan, just go live there. And then you have the same people, only of different colors or religious ethnicity. Jews were in that category as well, and all of a sudden this isn't available to you. So my dad, went where it was available, and public housing was what the alternative was for for veterans who weren't, able to qualify. So we grew up in public housing. My mom, I would say she typed 100 words a minute, but she was not able to get a job in corporate America because corporations didn't hire women like her. And she used to feel bad. She'd go by and she'd see storefronts and she'd see people, as they said back then, hunting and pecking, and my mother's fingers could fly, but she couldn't get a job there. But she did get a job in New York City in civil service, and she rose to the top of the steno pool in the Corporation Council of New York City. We grew up, they raised us, devout Catholics, and my parents they just did their work, and we weren't the South, so where you could see the unfolding of the overt, back, the fighting back against this overt racism in the North, we didn't have colored only fountains. I didn't have dogs unleashed on me. And my parents were just, struggling. We had a roof over our head. My dad worked for Western Electric when he came out, and Western Electric was part of the Bell system. And he had a job. I went doing a summer internship where he worked, and every black and brown person worked in the basement of Western Electric, and you just didn't get a promotion. And but we had health insurance. I was very sick. I was asthmatic and had a lot of problems. I had eczema, by the way, from head to toe, practically. I mean, it was not good. But I never lacked for medical care because he was in a union. So I went to public schools, lived in public housing, and I always had health coverage. My mother, after my brother and I were born, she came home and did what women did because they didn't have daycare and so on. So she raised the kids, and they lived quiet lives. But I didn't realize really that until when I got and I went after I had my first child at 19, and I went to work and went to the Bell system, and women were in either the business office or you were operators. This was just our world. And so I went into the business office, and I remember the woman who was my supervisor, who trained the company policy, was that a single woman who was just moving into their apartment, for this is when you wanted phone service, just moving into your apartment new, who had less than 6 months employment, you had to ask them for a deposit of $50. A single man, under those, he had to have 4 characteristics that they considered negative before you asked them for a deposit. And basically, like if they were single, that was not a strike against them. But if you were a woman who was single, it was. Why? Because women were flighty. We, just would run off and get married. We were irresponsible. And I was trained, and I was like, okay. And, and I think that goes to your point, right? Because as a woman, as a single woman at the time, it never occurred to me, that what we were doing was inherently, sexist and discriminatory, and none of those things. It was like I was giving the company line, which we all believed, period. And it wasn't until I was the beneficiary of a class action suit, which called them on the fact that women, people of color, were never promoted into higher positions, did after several years of waiting, because we were only able to filter in 2 or 3 at a time, and that's if you took a big test and then this and that and so on and so forth. I was able to go into the sales and marketing division, and my whole world changed. I mean, I had like a $20,000 increase, and all of a sudden I had access to a company car, and my husband, and a lot of good things happen. But again, didn't realize, you're struggling as a single parent, didn't even realize, the fact that I had been held back because of, again, the inherent racism, sexism, and so on and so forth. I think our parents spend a lot of time trying not to have us focus on that. But I will say, fast forward when I got involved in politics, and it was certainly not because, again, it wasn't anything that I dreamt of. It wasn't anything that I saw myself in. And I didn't have any role models. I really love journalism, and so I'm happy to be in a newsroom. I am a former reporter and teacher, but I
Wait, you can't jump over those. You're a former reporter and a former teacher, and I mean, both are skills, I would think, that are necessary for any politician, much less
That's right.
a conference leader.
That's
You
right.
know, in terms of the collection of information,
That's
knowing what is true and staying in touch with one's community, those are all things that are important in journalism.
That's right.
Learning how to somehow control and direct a sometimes obstreperous and ill-disciplined group of individuals is important.
Not
in
my
teaching.
conference.
No, of course not. No, I mean, what are the skills that you took away from those experiences of being a reporter, being a teacher?
You mentioned those skills, and I said I got into government sort of, again, accidentally, because I had those skills, and I was really waiting for my team. I went to school at night, because I have 3 kids, and so, I was going to school like in between my life, and I wanted to be a journalist. I loved, writing. I loved words. I loved communicating, and so, and again, I never saw anybody like me doing this. So I always felt that if it didn't happen, it was because nobody like me did it. And actually, it turned out it did. Around the 60s or so, people started realizing that when you want to go into these communities, it's nice to have somebody who people can identify with. You want them to tell you their stories. And so things started opening up, and I, as my family grew, though, it was hard to be out on weekends, nights, running around, chasing stories, and so on and so forth. So teaching was the next logical thing to me because, it matched my life. And so I went back to school to get my teaching credentials. So I didn't realize, however, that one of the things you should do, because I was able to teach in Yonkers schools and high school and so on and so forth, even while I didn't have my certification. And then when I finally got it, I waited to apply like in June or something, and it turned out that people who wanted to teach applied earlier. So I was managing personnel, and my friend decided she wanted to run for city council. She would be the first African-American woman on the city council of Yonkers. And so I helped her, and that's where the skills came in. They asked me to be her policy director and her speechwriter. So, okay, so I used those things. Now, Yonkers was going through the desegregation period.
Right. Yeah.
And which again, here we are, it was, we moved into Yonkers from the city in like 79, and we moved on a block that was, everybody was there. I didn't know anything about Yonkers. We were tired of the traffic in New York City. We were tired of the parking tickets, you name it. And I said, let's get on the, Henry Hudson and see what's next. And it was Yonkers, pretty much. Got off, and there were trees, and so and again, my husband was white, and so we got into. He actually died in 2007, so it was because he's a wonderful guy, and so we found this place in Yonkers. Who knew that had we moved 5 blocks north, it would have been all white. Had we moved 5 blocks south, it would have been all black and brown. We found miraculously this place where like kind of everybody was, and we thought that was just how it was. And
And was that a good thing or a
it
bad
was
thing?
a great thing. No, it
In
was.
that time,
It
because
was
Yonkers
great.
was really ripped apart.
It wasn't at that point though.
Yeah.
See, so this was '79 when we got there. And so like I got to that kind of Mason-Dixon line. Everybody was at this place, you know, and so we thought that was Yonkers. And certainly in the '80s, this is when it all unfolded. That this has been a city that East was East and West was West, and never the twain was going to meet. I mean, they've got, you know, in like so many communities, you know, whole sections that were kind of bridged off. I mean, it was incredible. We had no idea. And so here I am, you know, we're raising 3 kids, and all of a sudden all of this unfolds. And so I had to become part of it just because you know, here I was. And so when I got into politics, it was a part of, again, working with my friend who, she was African American. We worked in the NAACP together. We worked on other people's campaigns together. And she was going to be part of the team. There were 3 people running for mayor, and 2 of the 3 did not want to comply with the desegregation order. Only the one who was running as a Democrat, I must say, the other was a Republican and a conservative, so he was the one. So we were all in. So I helped my friend, and she won the primary. And then I rolled over my skills to the mayoral race, and he won. And then he asked me to join his administration as director of community affairs. So my job was to start talking to East, you know, and mollify and pacify, you know, no, this is different, but, you know, everybody who used to be part of government, you're still part of government, but it was also to bring in the people who were not. And so even me having a role like that was very, very different for the city of Yonkers. So it was about creating the policy and trying to build unity in the city. And that's where I realized that every skill that I had was important in that role. And that's also where it crystallized for me what government can do. Because I realized that the same government that segregated my dad and didn't allow my mom to, you know, get into court, or me to rise, I was, you know, I mean, it was just amazing. The same government was the government that desegregated the city, that built public housing, you know, even though it was denying access to you know, other kinds of benefits, created public schools. You know, it was the same government that allowed for a class action suit that allowed me to move forward, same government that desegregated the schools and the city that I was living in. So I realized government can do good things, it can do bad things. It can build barriers, or it can tear down walls. And here I was at that moment, and I realized that if I was going to be here, all the skills that I had acquired were right for that thing. And if I was going to be part of it, I was going to be part that pulled down the barriers so that people could achieve. And that's what I do. I know why I do these things. I just, you know, I just, you know.
See, journalists know how to frame stories so well. So that, in '92, you became director of community affairs. In '96, you ran for Westchester County legislature for the first time. In 2004, that was your first run for state senate. You took on Nick Spano and lost by how many votes?
18
votes. Yes.
18 votes it was the longest contested race in state history.
Right.
They told me in February of the following year that I lost by 18 votes.
Yeah. Close finishes seem to mark your career in so many ways, so it seems. And then in 2006, elected in pretty much a walk.
Right. Well, wasn't it? Come on.
No. You won handily. It was not by. There was no 18-vote margin.
No. And even then, he didn't concede till the end of November, but it was over 2,000 votes, and we moved on.
So I started covering the Capitol in the summer of 2008, just after Eliot Spitzer departed. But my first awareness of you came during the coup in June of 2009. And people should understand that you were really the primary person who, during the coup, and just to offer a little bit of backstory, Pedro Espada, let's not talk about him too much, flipped over to the Republicans and the chamber was split 31-31, which left open the question of who was controlling the session, because as you noted, you need 32 people to do anything, including convene session. So you were one of the people, I think the primary person, who was sent into the chamber in the early morning to stand at the podium, usually with one other was there, it was usually a sergeant at arms or somebody else who was sent up there to stand alongside you in an empty chamber so that Democrats could essentially control the rostrum and maintain session. And I can remember one session that was the most bizarre that I've ever seen, and you probably remember this as well, where George Winter, who had that role on the Republican side, was trying to convene session on his own from the desks where the reporters would sit in front of the rostrum. And so he was banging his gavel on one of the reporters' desks, and I believe were you
I was there.
Yeah, in the podium for that. And so there were two parallel competing sessions going on. And I can remember Irene Liu, my former office mate, coming in and just closing the door and saying, "You wouldn't believe it, Andrea Stewart-Cousins has been standing there for hours controlling the chamber. It's incredible." Now, for me, covering the coup it was sort of like, being a reporter covering the Battle of the Somme. But I mean, what was that experience like for you, and what lessons did you take away from it in terms of how not to run? At that time, Malcolm Smith, then the majority leader, another name somewhat, had 32 members. As you started off, just about the first thing you said after we sat down was that you have 39 members.
Right.
What's the difference between having 32 members, a bare majority, and 39?
Oh, yeah. Well, first of all, when I got elected when I started in 2007, I will say that Jay Gallagher, I remember Jay was, again, a wonderful reporter. He's since gone on. But
all three of us used to work for Gannett. Jay Gallagher was passed away.
That's right.
In 2010.
That's exactly right.
I used to work for the Burlington
Is
Free
that
Press.
so?
Gannett
Oh,
paper,
okay. So me too.
Yeah.
Yes.
How's your 401k?
Yes. So I'm just So Jay Gallagher, I remember when I first got there, and Eliot was being, I know something was happening good, it was the beginning, because he got elected governor and I got elected senator. And I remember him saying to me, because Eliot's motto was day one, everything changes. And to this day, that has been absolutely the hallmark of what I've seen here. But Jay was saying to me, I've been covering this for so long, and everything is always the same. He claims everything's going to change, but nothing ever changes in Albany. There's always these three men in the room. It's always, everybody knows. And he was asking me, do you really think it's going to change? And I said, the fact that you're sitting here talking to me already tells you things have changed. I'd be the 28-year incumbent. I'd be the deputy majority leader. I'm from Westchester County. I'm telling you everything's going to change. And sure enough, there has never been what is called a normal session that I have experienced. I do not know what normal looks like. I do not. I don't. So I couldn't even tell you, because 2007, he was gone by 2008. And then 2008, Lieutenant Governor Patterson at the time became Governor Patterson, first black man legally blind to become governor. And also, I think we changed controllers. So we changed
under duress.
Yeah, a lot of duress. Because we changed governors under duress, controllers under duress. We changed the majority leaders, I guess. Bruno left.
Yep.
Skelos
Left
came.
literally a week before I started at the Capitol.
Before
He
you
was
started?
on, yeah.
I mean, everything started changing, and the Democrats became the majority in 2009, and it was the first time, I think, in 30 some odd years.
Yeah, early 60s.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, 40 some odd years. So I mean, here we were in the majority, and we couldn't know that we were in the majority because even before that, there was I think there were the three amigos, right?
Four, if you
The
count
four amigos.
Ruben Diaz Sr. Yeah.
Right, Ruben Diaz, Kruger, Espada, and Montserrat.
That's right.
Right? They, I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Well, in fairness, only 3 of them were hauled off to prison.
In fairness, yes, and Ruben Diaz is now a city council person. Yes, but they decided that, oh my goodness, we could be the make or break of a majority. We could be with the Republicans and make their majority, or we could be with the Democrats and make their majority. So I guess I was new, I guess there was kind of a bidding war for them that went on until January 7th of 2009. So think about that. Nobody knew who was the majority, so the Republicans weren't letting anything go. Democrats couldn't, although we had the numerical majority, because we had this group of people who wouldn't say they were going to be with us, nobody could hire new people. So on the day of the state on January 7th, we apparently on the Democratic side won the bidding war, and they said that we would be the majority. But I guess there was always in the back of people's heads how they could manipulate the, whatever was happening there. And so just as like you're saying, we were coming towards the end, there was no real big, heavy lifting legislation that was happening. So we were coming to the end of the session, and I remember, because it was my bill, the Reproductive Health Act, we were going to bring that up at around June, I guess.
June 9th, yeah.
Yeah.
I never knew that. That was one of the bills that did not make it to the floor.
That was one of the bills that did not make it to the floor. And it was funny because, there has been a lot of opposition to the Reproductive Health Act. I mean, I had people picketing me, and I mean, there were a lot of different things. But just so you know, what we were trying to do, what we've ultimately done, is codify the federal laws into New York State law, because New York State passed their abortion laws prior to Roe v. Wade. And so some of the provisions on the federal level do not apply to New York, or at least did not apply to women here in New York. So there were restrictions that we had that were not in the federal law, as well as the fact that our codes, our abortion laws were under the criminal codes under homicide, not in health and so on and so forth. So the things we were trying to do. And I knew we were almost at that point, and I said, nobody's calling me names, nobody's picketing me, and we're gonna pass this bill. How's that working? Well, it's because they weren't gonna pass the bill, they were gonna have a coup. And they got Montserrat and Espada, they took 2, I think, and passed up some legislation that we began, our person up there began to read, and it was where can you imagine? It's like, oh, hereby in the chamber, we're now, changing majorities, you're out.
Right.
And I'm like, what?
These fellas will now be the majority.
And the next thing you know, they're swearing in the 2 guys from our side to be their guys, and we're like, how did this happen? So it began the real unraveling. We, refused to cede the chamber to people who would seize control using 2 of our weakest links. They felt, since they had, pulled one over on us, that they now had the vast majority of the legislators there, so therefore they should be in charge, and so the duel began. And I remember Dean Skelos getting on saying, we can't let them run the chamber. As Rex, sorry, I guess, and you were talking about how the Republicans were just kind of a monolith, all white, mostly male. And my conference, because we represent, different parts, and at that time, a lot of New York City members. Now we're all over the state. But, it was black and brown, and there were gay and straight, and it was just a mix, and it just didn't, I think it was just shocking, in many ways for the state, and, what was the status quo now being changed, to all of a sudden see different people in this role. And I also want to contextualize it because President Obama had just become president, and David Patterson was the governor, and you got Malcolm Smith, the black man, majority leader. I just think that it was like, what happened? There was a revolution. and I woke up, and all of a sudden, how did this happen in New York? And so the Dean felt perfectly justified in taking the government back, and that's what happened. And as I say, this IDC was a more polite way. I mean, we eventually bought, and I say bought, the two guys back to be part of our majority again.
At great cost.
At great cost.
Moral cost.
At great cost in so many levels, but we bought them back. And of course, we had been tagged with being unable to govern and just awful, frankly. And it never, which is what eventually led to us turning the page completely, and my election, we lost the majority after that in the midterms after the presidential, and so we lost the majority, and then in 2010 was a terrible time to lose the majority because the census happened then, and then the redistricting, and the next thing you know, my district that looked like a wonderful rectangle is now gerrymandered, and it is the smiling profile of an old man with straggly hair. At that time, we also had 62 senators, and the Republicans decided it would be good to have 63, so that they could be, proportioned in a different way. So I will say, and I said it to Senator Flanagan as they, understood that we have decisively won our majority against all odds. I said, you guys tried every trick in the book. You added things, you gerrymandered, you had coups, and you had an IDC, you had it all. You have used every trick up your proverbial sleeve. We're in now, and we want parity. They have it for the better part of 100 years, and I said, I just want parity. I'm planning to, set a tone, set a bar, and set a momentum that says that not only we can govern, but we can govern the entire state with integrity, with intelligence, with diversity that reflects our state, and with a progressive attitude that's conscious of the tax burdens and the importance of the economy, creating a strong economy. So we're going to prove that we're going to do all those things.
It's about 9:20 now? Okay, great. So we know you have
Yes.
have to get out of here. So my last question brings us back up into the present day.
Yeah.
And how will the Democratic majority rebut the charge now being leveled by the GOP that it kind of goes to exactly what you were talking about. The conference is solely concerned with the 5 boroughs, that upstate is going to be left behind, that it's all going to be about the MTA, it won't be about the thruway authority, that type of thing. I mean, I said I was speaking to these engineers yesterday. The Canal Corporation had a presentation just outside, and one of the questions that they got from the crowd was, what is your sense of the Democratic Conference's attitude towards building large infrastructure projects?
We're all for it.
Well, yeah, but the response was like, man, I don't know, you're gonna have to talk to those guys about that. It was somewhat dismissive, I thought.
Yeah, I know, people, again, people are resistant to change, we know that. And as long as you can send out, messages that have been sort of parroted, and it's like, where we began, if you're living in an environment that they tell you is perfectly fine, and despite the fact that it isn't, but this is what you do and how you've seen it and how it's always been, you believe it. So I understand that we have a task ahead of us. Like I said, every time I talk to the people who explain to me why Republicans are better at this or that, they'll always come with the same thing. And, the New York is 49 out of 50 and terrible place to do business. They give me all these statistics and then they tell me how great the Republicans are. I'm trying to figure this out. Explain that to me. Well, if all these things are wrong and these are the heroes, what are you scared of? So the reality is that we have obviously learned a lot, we've grown a lot, and we've got senators from Long Island. I mean, there are 6 of my senators are from Long Island. That's amazing. We've got upstate, so, Buffalo, so from Long Island to Buffalo, we are spreading out. And the reason why people are understanding that it matters who sits at the table is because people are understanding from a national level and every other level, it matters who sits at the table. It does. And we've got representatives now in all these corners who understand that they have to fight for their regions. They've got to fight to make New York not only a progressive leader, but a strong economic leader, that people have to find it affordable. We are not confused, and I will be traveling all over the state. I'll be showing up in all these places when it's warmer. and passing legislation, and that's why we did the tax cap. Newsday would kind of panned us, or you didn't, you should have done this, you should have held something to get something, and it's just so important that people who have their, their mind set on who we are, to know that what you think is not necessarily the reality. And so by putting out that bill that Republicans were not the only people who understood tax sensitivity, was a very important message for me to put out there. And it's something that our conference believes in, just like infrastructure, just like, I met with Unshackle New York yesterday, and they're very conservative upstate, and they called, and I wanted them in right away, because they need to know that if we work together, I think we have to, because government clearly matters. If we work together, you're not going to love everything we do, but you're not going to hate everything we do either. And in fact, while Newsday was panning what we did, they were like, thank you for what you did. And I said, well, tell them. And,
we have questions that were submitted by the audience.
Okay.
This will be something of a speed
Lightning
round.
round.
Yes. Will you support driver's license for undocumented immigrants?
It's something we're talking about. We're just beginning that conversation. So, I don't have an answer for that, but our conference is certainly, listening.
Since you've supported it in the past, will the climate change bill be up for a vote soon? That's I think the CCPA.
We believe in climate change. We believe in science. And again, this is a conversation that, but good conversation.
There was a question posed about potential changes to 50A, which is the portion of state law that restricts the release, really bans the release of any police disciplinary records that could be used in an employee review. in effect, it means that cops who have had, excessive force complaints, that type of thing, those are in large part banned from release. It's a subject very close to the heart of journalists like yourself.
Yes, I'm sure we like disclosure,
Yes.
we like information. Again, it's something that we have not begun to talk about, but we're going to have a very busy, you could see, I mean, because we didn't talk about so many things, but there's a lot of very important issues that we have not, as a conference, begun to look at. But again, I will promise that
Only
we will
January.
get. It's only January, and we had some things. I was just clearing out the backlog, really. So we just moving that stuff. But I can assure you that those issues and so many more will get we're doing hearings where there were never hearings before. I created new committees, including, revenue, budget, internet, technology, things that are, I think, speaking to where we are today and where we need to go. So we are looking at getting as much inclusion, as much transparency, so that we can come up with as many good solutions for New Yorkers going forward.
And a last question that I'm happy to say was submitted by the audience. What message do you have for women who wish to lead?
Yes, we can. Yes, we can. And we must. No more sitting it out, ladies. But I can look at your crowd, though. Yes, and it's exciting. So, we need your voice, we need your input, we need your strength, we need your perspective. And along with our male counterparts, we can really change the world in a very, very good way.
Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Thanks to all of you as well for coming out on this very frigid morning. Please come back for more Capitol Confidential breakfast events, and please drive safely today.
Like, we discussed it. Like, why would you let you announce arts? Like, what does that even mean? Yeah, they can hang. Oh, yeah, no, I think they can I don't think it's going to be bad that I'll start later. Well, maybe when you look at it. Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate it. Love Wayne. Yeah, he's the best. Thank you very much. Okay. Oh, what's your church? Oh, okay. Yeah.
Williams Church.
That's right. Yeah.
So happy I was.
Yeah. I heard him sing there one time. Gorgeous voice. Hey. What was your question? And you.
Very good.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the reason.
Okay, so how do you too? How do I go to people speaker?